They called me the Nanny Slayer of Manhattan, a title earned through 17 failed attempts to tame the silent, destructive storm that was my son. They called me the Nanny Slayer of Manhattan. Not to my face, of course. To my face, they called me Mr. Blackwood. But I knew what the high-end agencies whispered when my assistant called. Another one bites the dust. Number 18 was a stern-looking German woman with a resume so flawless it could have been printed on gold leaf. She lasted 4 weeks, a record in the post-Eliza era. She was fired the moment I came home to find my 7-year-old son, Leo, sitting silently in the middle of his playroom, having meticulously snapped the head off every single one of his hand-carved wooden knights. She had been trying to force-feed him steamed asparagus. My son hadn't spoken a full sentence in the 2 years since his mother passed away. He communicated in silence, in storms of quiet destruction, and in hollow eyes that seemed to look right through you. My fortune, a sprawling tech empire built on cold, hard logic, could solve any problem except this one. I could buy the best therapists, the most sought-after educators, the most experienced caregivers, and one by one they all failed. They came in with their color-coded schedules, their positive reinforcement charts, and their unwavering belief that a child, any child, was a machine that simply required the correct inputs to produce the desired output. They tried to impose order on Leo's chaos. The chaos always won. I was interviewing number 19, and I was already exhausted. My assistant, bless her patient heart, had warned me this one was different. Her name was Sarah. She wasn't severe-looking or starched and ironed like the others. She wore a simple dress and had a calm, unnerving stillness about her. Her resume was a mess. A degree in art therapy, volunteer work at a children's grief center, a stint teaching in a remote village in Peru. There was no mention of working for any high-net-worth families. "Miss Jenkins," I began, my voice clipped. "My son is particular. He requires a rigid structure. His meals are at 8, 12, and 6 precisely. Educational activities from 9 to 11. Outdoor time, regardless of weather, from 2 to 3. There is no screen time. There are no exceptions. The last nanny failed to grasp the importance of this. Sarah didn't write anything down. She just watched me, her gaze steady. "May I ask you something, Mr. Blackwood?" I gritted my teeth. "Go on. What does Leo love?" The question threw me. I blinked. "Love? He's a child. He loves his toys, I suppose, though he has a habit of breaking them." "No," she said, her voice soft but firm. "What makes his eyes light up? What makes him forget everything else, even for a second?" I had no answer. I thought of the quarterly reports on my desk, the market projections, the multi-billion-dollar acquisitions. I could tell you the exact performance of every single one of my assets, but I couldn't answer this simple question about my own son. The silence in my vast, sterile office was damning. "I see," she said, though there was no judgment in her tone. Against my better judgment, fueled by a desperation I refused to acknowledge, I hired her. I told myself it was an experiment, a new variable in a failing equation. Her first day was today. I left her with the laminated minute-by-minute schedule and a list of emergency contacts that included the city's top 3 pediatric specialists. I spent the entire morning in a state of high alert. My focus fractured between a hostile takeover bid and the live security feed from the playroom on my second monitor. For the first hour, nothing happened. Sarah sat on the floor, not speaking to Leo, just being there. Leo was in his corner, methodically pulling the stuffing out of a silk pillow. Number 18 would have snatched it away and delivered a lecture on respecting property. Sarah just watched. Then she pulled a single sheet of paper from her bag. No educational flashcards, no workbooks. Just a plain, white sheet of paper. She began to fold it. A crease here, a tuck there. Slowly, methodically, an elegant swan began to take shape in her hands. Leo's hands, which had been tearing and shredding, gradually stilled. His head tilted. His eyes, for the first time I could remember, were focused. He watched her fingers dance across the paper. She finished the swan and placed it on the floor between them. She didn't offer it to him. She didn't say, "Look what I made for you." She just set it down, a silent offering, and picked up another sheet of paper. I was so captivated by this bizarre, quiet scene that I almost missed my 11 a.m. video conference. For the next 2 hours, I watched them. Sarah folded. Leo watched. The floor between them became populated with a silent menagerie of paper animals. A fox, a dragon, a tiny, intricate frog. Leo never moved from his corner, but the destructive energy that usually radiated from him had dissipated, replaced by a palpable, fragile curiosity. Lunchtime arrived. 12:06 p.m. The schedule dictated Leo was to be seated at the table for his organic, nutritionally balanced meal. I watched the feed, my fingers drumming on my desk, waiting for the inevitable confrontation, the thrown plate, the silent tantrum. But Sarah didn't lead him to the dining room. Instead, she stood up, walked over to the schedule I had pinned to the wall, the sacred text that 17 nannies had tried and failed to implement. She looked directly at the camera in the corner of the room, as if she knew I was watching. Then, with a calm, deliberate motion, she took the schedule off the wall and ripped it cleanly in two. My heart hammered against my ribs, just as I was about to slam my fist on the intercom button to demand what in God's name she thought she was doing. The video feed from the playroom flickered once, then went completely black. The screen went dead. A void. A black hole where my son was supposed to be. For a man who controlled a global network of servers, a single offline camera in my own home felt like a declaration of war. My first instinct was to call security and have them storm the penthouse. My second was rage, pure and cold. How dare she? How dare she sever my connection, my control? I slammed my laptop shut, the sound echoing in the cavernous silence of my office. "Clear my afternoon," I barked into the intercom as I grabbed my jacket. I was going home. The journey through Manhattan was a blur of horns and traffic lights, each one a personal affront delaying my arrival. I rehearsed the firing speech in my head. It would be swift, brutal, and final. I would have her escorted from the building and blacklisted from every agency in the city. No one defies me. No one makes decisions about my son, especially not a failed art therapist with a penchant for insubordination. I burst through the front door of the penthouse, my voice a low growl. "Sarah!" Silence answered me. The air was still, heavy. I strode towards the playroom, my heart a cold stone in my chest, bracing myself for what I might find. A broken window? My son missing? The room was empty. Eerily so. The torn schedule lay on the plush carpet like a casualty of some quiet coup, and in the center of the room, her paper animals, the swan, the fox, the dragon, were arranged in a perfect silent circle, like witnesses to a crime. A knot of unease tightened in my gut. This wasn't the chaos I expected. It was something else, something calculated. I moved through the apartment, my footsteps echoing on the marble floors. The kitchen was spotless. Leo's bedroom was untouched. It was then that I noticed it. A door, usually kept locked, was slightly ajar. My wife's studio. No one went in there, not even the cleaning staff. It was a shrine, a time capsule of color and light, and everything I had lost. I pushed the door open, my breath catching in my throat. The scent hit me first turpentine and old canvas and the faint, floral perfume Eliza used to wear. The room was just as she'd left it. Canvases leaning against the walls, an unfinished portrait on the easel. And there, in a pool of afternoon sunlight on the floor, were Sarah and Leo. They were surrounded by tubs of wet, gray clay. Sarah was calmly sculpting something, her hands moving with a practiced grace. And next to her was my son, my silent, destructive child. His hands, the same hands that destroyed his toys and ripped apart pillows, were plunged deep into the clay. He wasn't destroying. He was building. He was pressing and pinching, his brow furrowed in a concentration I had never seen on his face before. A smudge of gray clay was smeared across his cheek, and his eyes, usually so vacant, were alive. They were shining. The sight disarmed me completely. The rage evaporated, leaving a hollow ache of confusion. I must have made a sound because Sarah looked up. She wasn't startled or afraid. She simply met my gaze, her expression unreadable. "What is this?" I managed, my voice harsher than I intended. "Why are you in here? Why did you disable the camera?" She wiped her hands on a rag, her movements unhurried. "The camera was a distraction, Mr. Blackwood. He knew you were watching. He couldn't be free. And this room, it feels like her. I thought he might feel it too." Her simple, devastating logic struck me dumb. Of course he would feel it. Why had I never thought to bring him here? I had sealed away his mother's memory like a liability, something to be managed and contained, when all this time, maybe he just needed to breathe the same air she did. I looked at Leo, truly looked at him, and for the first time, I didn't see a problem to be solved. I saw a little boy covered in clay, mesmerized by the simple act of creation. My resolve hardened again, a reflex born of years of control. This was still a breach, a flagrant violation of my trust. "Your experiment is over," I said, the words tasting like ash. "You're fired. Pack your things." Sarah didn't argue. She simply nodded, a flicker of disappointment crossing her face. She started to rise, but then Leo moved. He pulled his hands from the clay and held up the lumpy, misshapen figure he'd been working on. He didn't look at Sarah, or at the door. He looked straight at me. He held the clay effigy in his small hand, his arm outstretched, his mouth opened. A sound, rusty and cracked from 2 years of silence, escaped his lips. It was a single, whispered word, an earthquake that shattered the foundations of my world. "You." The word hung in the sun-drenched air of the studio, small and insignificant, yet possessing the force of a tidal wave. "You." It wasn't an accusation, it wasn't a question, it was a statement, a recognition. My son, who had looked through me for 2 years, was finally seeing me. He held out the lumpy gray figure, an effigy of a man with broad shoulders and no face. Me. The shock was a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. The firing speech I'd prepared, the anger, the carefully constructed walls around my heart, they all crumbled into dust. Sarah sank back to the floor, her eyes wide, fixed on Leo. She was holding her breath, as if the slightest movement might break the spell. For a long moment nobody moved. The only sound was the distant hum of the city, a world away from this sacred, fragile truce. I took a tentative step into the room, my expensive leather shoes silent on the paint-splattered floorboards. I crouched down, bringing myself to his level, something I realized with a fresh pang of guilt I hadn't done in a very, very long time. "Leo!" My voice was a raw whisper. He didn't answer. He just kept his arm extended, offering me the featureless clayman. I reached out, my hand trembling slightly, and took it from him. It was heavy, still damp and cool to the touch. I turned it over in my palm. It was crude, childish, but the intention was unmistakable. He had made me. He had spent his afternoon not destroying, but creating an image of his father. I looked from the clay figure to my son's face. The hollow emptiness was gone, replaced by an expression of intense, waiting stillness. It was as if he had handed me a key and was waiting to see if I knew which lock it fit. And in that moment, staring into the eyes of my own child, I felt like a stranger. This boy, this mystery living in my home, had been speaking a language I'd refused to learn, the language of broken nights, of shredded pillows, of profound and deafening silence, and Sarah, in less than a day, had started to translate. "You're not fired," I said, my voice quiet but firm, my eyes still locked on Leo. I felt Sarah exhale beside me, a soft whoosh of released tension. I stood up, the clay man clutched in my hand like a holy relic. "Clean this up. And Sarah, from now on, there is no schedule." The next few weeks were a revelation. Sarah didn't just throw out the schedule. She dismantled my entire sterile, ordered approach to raising my son. She replaced educational workbooks with finger painting on the penthouse terrace. She replaced timed outdoor excursions with spontaneous trips to the Natural History Museum, where Leo would stand for an hour, mesmerized, in front of the giant blue whale. The kitchen, once a place of rigid nutritional planning, became a glorious mess of flour and dough as she and Leo made lopsided pizzas and cookies shaped like dinosaurs. And Leo began to emerge. The words didn't come in a flood, but in a slow, steady trickle. He started pointing at things, naming them. Car, bird, blue. He still broke things, but now it was different. He would take apart his old clockwork toys, not in a fit of silent rage, but with the focused curiosity of an engineer, laying out the gears and springs in neat little rows. Sarah didn't stop him. She gave him a set of small screwdrivers and sat with him, asking him questions. "What do you think this piece does?" I found myself rushing home from work, consumed by a need to see what they were doing. I'd stand in the doorway, unseen, and just watch them. I watched them build a sprawling fort out of my expensive linen sheets. I watched Sarah teach him how to play a simple 3-chord song on his mother's old ukulele, his small fingers fumbling but determined. I was a ghost in my own home, observing a life being built that I had no part in. Sarah never overstepped. She was deferential to me, providing quiet reports at the end of each day. He seemed to enjoy the texture of the sand today. He asked about the color of his mother's eyes. She never criticized my previous methods. She didn't have to. The evidence of my failure was in every new smile that graced Leo's face, and with every smile a shard of guilt lodged itself deeper in my heart. One evening I came home to find the apartment quiet. Too quiet. A flicker of the old panic returned. I found Sarah in the kitchen, packing a small box with jars of paint and brushes. The fort was gone. The toys were put away. The air of joyful chaos had been replaced by a sterile order I knew all too well. "Where is he?" I asked, my voice tight. "He's in his room," she said, not meeting my eyes. "He asked to be alone." I went to his bedroom and peeked inside. He was sitting on his bed, his back to the door, staring at the wall. The silence emanating from the room was different. It wasn't the calm, focused silence of creation. It was the old silence, the heavy, hollow silence of despair. I felt my blood run cold. "What happened?" I demanded, striding back into the kitchen. "What did you do?" Sarah finally looked at me, and her eyes were filled with a deep, sorrowful pity that I found infuriating. "It's Thursday, Mr. Blackwood. It's the anniversary." I stared at her blankly. "The anniversary of what?" Her expression faltered, a flicker of disbelief crossing her features. She glanced at the calendar on the wall, then back at me, her voice barely a whisper. "It's the day his mother died." Her words struck me with the force of a physical blow. The anniversary. Of course. How could I have forgotten? The date was seared into my memory, a brand I usually commemorated by burying myself in 12 hours of ruthless back-to-back meetings, a self-inflicted penance of distraction. I had built a fortress of work and routine around my grief, meticulously plastering over the cracks each year. It had never once occurred to me that my 7-year-old son, who had no such fortress, would feel the tremors of that day with the full force of an earthquake. I looked from Sarah's pitying face to the closed door of Leo's room, and the full crushing weight of my failure as a father crashed down on me. I hadn't just been a bad father. I had been an absent one, a ghost haunting the hallways of my own son's life, outsourcing his heart to a string of strangers because I couldn't bear to face my own. Sarah wasn't just a nanny. She was the first person who had bothered to see the boy, not the problem. What do I do? The question was raw, stripped of all my usual authority. It was the plea of a man completely and utterly lost. Sarah closed the box of paints and looked at me, her expression softening. "You go to him," she said simply. "You stop being Mr. Blackwood, the billionaire who fixes things, and you just be his dad." My feet felt like lead as I walked to his room. For 2 years I had managed Leo's grief like a business liability, something to be contained and mitigated. I had never once shared it. I pushed open the door and entered. He was still sitting on the bed, a small, lonely figure against the vast, empty wall. The clay man he'd made for me was on his bedside table, a silent, faceless sentinel. I didn't speak. I just walked over and sat down on the bed next to him. The mattress dipped under my weight. He didn't flinch or look at me. We sat there in the gathering dusk, 2 solitary islands of grief in a silent ocean. Minutes stretched into an eternity. I fought every instinct I had to fix it, to offer a solution, to fill the silence with empty platitudes. Instead, I did what Sarah had done on her first day. I just sat. I just was. Finally, I spoke, my voice thick. I miss her too. Leo's small shoulders hitched. A tiny, choked sob escaped his lips, the first sound of his sorrow I had ever allowed myself to hear. He turned then, and his face was a mess of tears and silent anguish. He didn't say a word. He just launched himself at me, burying his face in my chest, his small hands clutching the fabric of my expensive suit jacket as if he were drowning, and I held him. I wrapped my arms around my son, pulled him tight against me, and for the first time in 2 years, I let myself feel it all. The crushing weight of losing Eliza, the terrifying helplessness, the love for this little boy that was so fierce it hurt. I held him and I cried with him, my own silent tears soaking into his hair. We didn't need words. In that moment we were speaking the only language that mattered. We stayed like that for a long time, until the room was dark and his sobs had quieted into exhausted shudders. I carried him to my bed, tucked him in under the covers, and lay down beside him, something I hadn't done since he was a toddler. He fell asleep with his hand clutching my finger. I stayed awake all night, just watching the steady rise and fall of his chest, guarding his sleep. The next morning I walked into the kitchen. Sarah was there, a packed bag by her feet. She had an envelope in her hand. "I assume this is your resignation?" I said, my voice steady. She looked surprised. "My work here is done, Mr. Blackwood. You don't need a nanny anymore. Leo needs his father." "You're right," I said, taking the envelope from her but not opening it. "He does need his father, and his father needs help. I spent 2 years trying to hire someone to fix my son. What I really needed was someone to teach me how to be a dad again. Your job isn't over, Sarah. It's just changing." I tore her resignation letter in two, just as she had torn my schedule. "I'm promoting you. You're no longer the nanny. You're a consultant, a family consultant. Your first task is to clear my schedule for the rest of the week. Leo and I are going to the zoo, and after that we're going to make the messiest pizza this city has ever seen." A slow, genuine smile spread across her face, reaching her eyes. "I think I can do that, Mr. Blackwood." "Call me Andrew," I said. Later that day, I was in Eliza's old studio. The clay was still out. Leo was beside me, his hands happily smeared with gray, chattering away about the monkeys at the zoo. I picked up a piece of clay myself. My hands, so used to the cold, hard feel of a keyboard, felt clumsy and foreign. I started to press and pinch to mold the clay. I wasn't trying to make anything perfect. I was just trying. Beside me, Leo was humming the 3-chord song Sarah had taught him on the ukulele. The sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The room no longer felt like a shrine to what I had lost. It felt like a beginning. It felt like home.